This lecture, we will be looking at moral relativism as the other of the ethical preliminary theories. Um, Read this comic. It kind of gives you a little picture of moral relativism and kind of continues on that trend of egoism and the idea that morality and ethics is subjective. So I'll give you a minute to read this little comic and then we can move on. All right, so when we look at moral relativism, we think of it in two kinds, really. Descriptive relativism and moral relativism. Now, descriptive relativism are beliefs about morality and the values that people possess vary across cultures divided by times and places. While moral relativism is the truth of moral claims in which values people should adopt vary across cultures divided by times and places, what is morally permissible in one culture may be morally wrong in another culture. So I might think in terms of descriptive relativism in the idea that based on what has happened, let's say in the United States um, in the past, if judging that in terms of being wrong now is the case, then back when it was being instituted, it was not right. It was wrong then as well. We were just misled to believing that it was the case. An example might include something like slavery, for instance. If I was alive in the 17 and 1800s, I might believe that slavery was an acceptable practice. However, being alive now in the 21st century, we can look back and see that first, in this time and place in the 21st century, slavery is unacceptable. And looking back on the 17 and 1800s, I can also conclude that people who had slaves back then were wrong and the practice was wrong. And so I can judge past and present based on whatever values that I particularly possess now. Moral relativism, on the other hand, is completely relative to time, place, and culture. So slavery then was right, slavery now is wrong. Uh, Prohibiting women from driving in the Middle East now is wrong, letting women drive in the United States now is right. And so we can see with moral relativism, the relativity of what is right and wrong goes based on time, place, culture, and so forth. Descriptive relativism is essentially that based on what we know now, the past was not necessarily right. It was wrong. What we are doing now is in fact right. Now, when we look at descriptive relativism, though, we see that we're using kind of universals, facts about language use, um, patterns, symbolic gesturing, structure of social groups, and essentially making that decision based on descriptions of kind of how we understand social groups now, symbolic gesturing. And a problem really exists of whether or not, based on this descriptive relativism, we can clearly and confidently say what we're doing now is right, what we had done back in the 17, 1800s is wrong. Because we could be just as mistaken as people of the 17 and 1800s, and therefore we are prone to the same criticisms as they are. And so when we think of descriptive relativism, we think of kind of moral or proto-moral judgments, right? The idea, is it good to help others? Um, Incest and indiscriminate killings are wrong. One has duties of care towards one's children. Piety is good. So we can see instances here where we're making moral judgments based on our belief systems that we hold to be true. But this leads to entailment. And the idea of moral, or the idea that descriptive relativism will lead to moral relativism. So again, I may look back at the 1700s, I may look back at slavery and think people who had slaves, they were behaving wrong, they were behaving badly, this was a inhumane practice. And now the practice of equality is good, is right, is healthy. However, in the year 3000, will society look back on my actions as perhaps being wrong and short-sighted based on everything that they know? We can look at something, for instance, like our diet today, right? I might think that eating chicken, eating fish is fine. It's healthy to eat fish. Um, Maybe people should be pescatarians, and this is a good practice. Being a pescatarian is a good thing. It is healthy, um, and it is good for our nutrition and health. So my judgment of eating fish is very good now. However, in the year 3000, once we have learned more about the neuroscience of fish, of humans, of other animals, we might see that uh, fish have very similar minds to humans, and the idea that we farm and kill fish is abhorrent and equally as bad as killing another human to eat his or her flesh. And so my actions now will be judged based on the future. And so just purely having this idea of descriptive relativism doesn't really get us out of the idea that whatever I think to be right is going to be right for me and is going to guide my behavior, while another society or another time might think what is right for them might be contrary to what I had thought. And so we see this idea of descriptive relativism leading into moral relativism, this idea that beliefs of behavior and morals is subjective, but not necessarily on the individual basis that we saw with egoism, but instead just on the cultural time period of society now. And so when we look at moral relativism, thinking of whether or not that idea of what's right for my society is good, what's wrong for my society is wrong, what is good for another society might be right for them, what's wrong for them might be right for me, and so forth, we see that this presents problems just like with egoism. And one instance of that could be the idea of female genitalia mutilation. And so there are certain countries in Central Africa and East Asia that are pro female genitalia mutilation. They believe that there's nothing wrong with this practice and that it is beneficial to their particular society. Now, in America, people are typically anti-female genitalia mutilation. There is no scientific evidence that this is healthy. There is no cultural or social studies that have suggested that this is beneficial in any way. And in fact, it seems like an abhorrent practice coming from this kind of American Western perspective. Now, I might think to criticize a country that practices this particular behavior. However, under moral relativism, we see that what is right for their country and culture is right for their country and culture. What is right for our culture is good and right for our culture. However, this leaves me feeling a bit uneasy, knowing that there is a culture that believes something not founded on science, not founded on evidence, not founded on rationale or logic is acceptable. and will harm individuals in order to uphold this particular practice. I might think to my core that this is wrong, that there is no scientific, there is no rational justification for this practice. There is no health benefit. There is no way to really sterilize young girls that have to go through this. Many often die through this procedure. And all for the purpose of having this procedure done in order to not have pleasure from having sex. Essentially, we see that it is an instance of just kind of women are thought of in terms of being the procreating device, right? It's objectifying to women's bodies. But under this idea of moral relativism, I would have to accept this practice for that particular culture. And it's not clear that we really want to do this. We don't really want to suggest, oh yeah, that's right for you, but it's not right for us. In fact, this is what gets us into a lot of military conflicts in different countries. We believe countries are not doing what is right, not doing what they should be doing in terms of providing human rights, in terms of letting people be free, protecting people from government killings and so forth. And so we tend to step in to force our beliefs on other cultures. And so you can see where this is probably going. You wind up in a sense where now the beliefs of, let's say, America will contrast with the beliefs of, let's say, in Iran. And we might want to step in and force them to behave a certain way. Meanwhile, they might want to force us to behave in a certain way. And now we come to conflict. And how are we going to deal with this conflict? Is it good enough to just say, you do you and we're going to do us? Especially if people within that other country are crying out and pleading for help and so forth? Or do you step in because what is right and what is wrong has some fundamental principle beyond what is just subjective, beyond what is just acceptable in that particular culture and time period? And so if you think that female genitalia mutilation is wrong, no matter what society or time period you're in, then you have to conclude that moral relativism is false, right? If not allowing people to be free or have freedom of speech or to have any sort of practice, if that's not okay, then we have to conclude that one set of beliefs is wrong while another set of beliefs is correct. And we often kind of get ourselves in trouble with this, suggesting perhaps that other countries or other cultures are wrong in their behavior. Their morals are irrational or ill-founded. And so how do we go about justifying these certain instances where my culture is right, your culture is wrong? And does this show a disrespect for other cultures? What is disrespectful is not pointing out when wrongness has occurred. Then perhaps my pointing to bad behavior is me showing respect. For instance, if I have a friend who's behaving badly or behaving irrationally, then it is my duty as a friend, in cooperation with them, to help them see their mistake and learn from their mistake to become better. And so when we look out on other cultures or time periods and criticizing their behavior, if coming from a place of cooperation, perhaps we aren't not showing respect, but in fact, this is the action which shows respect. And so we gain this cultural partnership. However, this becomes problematic for moral relativism because moral relativism is going to say that, well, every culture is right or wrong. But that, of course, again, leads to these problems, these beliefs that are harmful, that are not based on science, that are not based on understanding of human culture.